All right, yeah, this is a great moment. Really, really happy to be sitting down with Jackie Durant. Jackie is the director of Hope City, which is a nonprofit here in Shasta County, but they also have hopes and dreams to be reaching other communities and what they're doing. And yeah, we're in the midst of trying to unpack and dive into the criminal justice system here in the U.S. Again, our hope with these conversations that we're learning, hopefully building some bridges, maybe erasing some common stereotypes. And yeah, hearing the testimony of Jesus that's alive in our day in this particular area of what I would say is social need. Like, I think a lot of people are impacted and affected by the criminal justice system. And so, anyways, I'm excited. I feel like I got a lot to learn. Stoked to have Jackie here. Jackie's got a ton of authority and experience in this space. So welcome, Jackie. How are you? Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me and saying I have authority. Woo! I just let's talk about that.
You definitely do. In fact, why don't you just start there? Like, talk about your experience with the criminal justice system, like which I think blends into why you're doing the things you're doing with Hope City. So feel free, as long as you need to take with that question.
I was thinking about this question and I'm like, oh my gosh, how far back do I go? Because
yeah,
living a hellacious lifestyle during my teenage years, it probably started then when I got picked up for the first time. But okay. Let's just move on forward past that.
Yeah.
Let me set this out here, is that that there's my faith-based life. Yeah. And then there's my organization that is not a religious organization at all. We're very working with secular communities, but today my director hat for Hope City is off. So I'm going to be just talking about what I love to do. I will share some of the things that restorative justice is being done through our organization, but primarily I want the freedom to be able to talk about my faith, because really it's my faith that brought me into learning more about restorative justice. And so having said that, when I first got saved, I was just a messed up teenager, and then I found out I was pregnant, and this family took me in. They just kind of wrapped their arms around me, covenanted with me, and they were involved in prison ministry, and I had never done anything like that. But there used to be this little prison camp between here and Weaverville called Crystal Creek, and we used to have church services there every week. And oh my gosh, it was amazing, the way to get my feet wet in the ministry and just see people saved, healed, and delivered. You should have, boy, those days demons were manifesting like crazy. I don't get to see stuff like that anymore. Okay. But anyway, it was awesome. People would get healed of crazy stuff, and then so I just started writing them letters, and to encourage them throughout the week. God would give me words of knowledge. I'd send them scriptures, back when there was no email, there was no, the technical devices that we have today. No. These were, they call them snail mail. It's where you have paper and a pen and an envelope, and you put this little stamp that cost 19 cents back then. And anyway, so I would send them Bible studies, and it just encouraged them throughout the week. And, I was a stay-at-home mom because, I was, my son was born, and I stayed home and cared for my son. And anyway, fast forward through several years of that, and I met a guy who was very much involved in the prison system. And fast forward through all the supernatural interventions of God in that relationship, and I married him. So I met him in 1986, and he was incarcerated. Okay. And in 1992, I married him.
Wow.
And so fast forward to today, and
while he was still incarcerated.
He was definitely incarcerated.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Well, that's a story right there. That's
yes.
That's probably like a whole session.
It would be. it could be easily.
Okay.
But you know, he was committed to his relationship with the Lord, and I was committed to my relationship with the Lord, as we are to this day. And so we've been married. This is our 30th year. We've been married 30 years.
Yeah.
So, and that's a testimony for lots of people, just to be married for that long to the same person, of course. So anyway, so my connection to the criminal justice system, you know, I pretty much married into it. And then, you know, working.
Let's go back a little bit. Like, what do you want people to know? Because again, we're trying to like lift the veil a little bit, maybe hear from people that are on the other side of the counter about stuff. Like, what would you want people to know about those that are incarcerated? Because I think there's an opportunity for judgment there, like, oh, they're bad people. But like, what's your perspective of people working with people that were in the prison population? I'm sure it's all manner of individuals. No one's the same.
Yeah.
No one's the same, but any insights there just to share with people that could be learning? And
well, it's the same anywhere. You know, you have broken people here, you have broken people in there. You have people with mental illness here, and you have people with mental illness there. You have healthy people out here. You have doctors and lawyers out here. You have doctors and lawyers in there. And just because they, you know, either made a mistake or intentionally made a mistake or made poor choices, lost their direction on their moral compass, whatever. You know, God is still God. He is still able to do abundantly above and beyond all that we could dare ask or even think. And people are still made in the image of God. And that's who we are talking about, are human beings. And, you know, what's that? You know, I was just reading that scripture. It was, you know, restore such a one who's lost their way, you know, even if they were caught in the middle of sin, you know, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. And I don't see here's a little judgment. Careful. I don't see a lot of people restoring such in a spirit of gentleness. I don't see a whole lot of it happening. It's sad because, you know, even Jesus said, even if I were in prison, you know, anyway.
Totally. Well, okay. And I interrupted you, but now let's start to get into, so you married your husband 30 years, congratulations. He was still incarcerated when you got married. He's no longer incarcerated. I know that because I know you. Talk a bit about Hope City, and I know you've got your hat on. Like,
sure.
It's
I can switch back and forth, no problem.
Yeah, we're talking about helping people. We're talking about like real issues in our generation, and how is Hope City helping people in the criminal justice system? What is Hope City doing? And I know this is a big piece of your passion, restorative justice.
Absolutely.
Let's start talking about that a bit.
So with restorative justice practices, it's there's a whole spectrum, you know, the prevention, you know, to prevent either conflict from happening or prevent people from getting incarcerated, prevent wrongdoing, prevent crime. So there's the prevention side, there's the intervention, and then there's the response. How do we respond to wrongdoing? How does restorative justice respond? And so, because restorative justice is a philosophy, you know, it's an approach to how you view wrongdoing, how you view crime, how you view people who've got trauma, you know. And so those are all injustices. And so in order to, you know, I don't teach about restorative justice until I make sure people really understand what justice is. And I know, you know, you and I are on the same page about that. You've probably already talked about it with some of your previous sessions, but, you know, if injustice causes harm, it causes wrongdoing, it causes trauma, then the antidote should heal, repair, restore, bring peace, reconcile, restore people. And so that's my approach. You know, I never get rid of justice when I'm talking about restorative practices that they do in school as a prevention. I'm talking about restorative justice practices. And just as a side note, I've been going to school for this, and it's been ingrained in or pushed on me that, we don't say that it's the criminal justice system. We say it's the criminal legal system, because there's a lot of not just processes that are in the criminal justice system.
Okay.
So, but it's very legal.
Yeah.
So the criminal legal system is a phrase that that is being used now, more widespread too. But anyway, so to get back to what Hope City is doing in the community, we are working in schools to bring prevention practices. Some of the things that we're doing, we're helping educators help their kids, their students, resolve conflict in a healthy way. Sometimes in our traditional systems, we've all heard about the school to prison pipeline, where we just punish and we focus on punishment. But in a restorative justice process, we're talking about healing, and not just healing the victim who has been harmed, because that is very necessary and important. We're also helping to heal the person who's responsible for causing that harm, because they're all stakeholders. They all dwell together, they all work together, or go to school together, or same community. And so in order to coexist, we've got to resolve these issues. We can't just sweep it under the rug and put a carpet over it and pretend it didn't happen. The issues need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed in a healthy way. And restorative justice provides elements that help people resolve issues in healthier ways. And one of the ways it does that is it focuses on the needs that the victim has to heal from that harm. Now, in our criminal legal system, we're not focusing on the needs of the victim. We're focusing on the punishment of the wrongdoer.
Okay.
And so even in our discipline systems in our schools, we're spending a lot of time managing other people's behavior and spending a lot of energy and resources on punishing them. And it's unfortunate, and it just causes more harm. And it really never addresses the root issue in the first place. We've got ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And it's been shown that restorative justice processes helps to mitigate, even bring healing to some of those traumatic situations. It mitigates it. There's even science that shows the psychological and the biological impact that a restorative justice process has on a person when they go through that harm and then they go through that restorative process. It shows the psychological healing element for it. And it's just like, this is what needs to happen on our school campuses, in households, in our criminal legal system, in our churches, in our, it's like we need more restoration. We need more of God's justice. And I call it God's justice because it's about restoring people. I think we both quote Jen Toledo on the definition of justice. It's the repair of every violation of the relationship, or the repair of every violation of the person. And even Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, he defined justice, and he says justice is love, correcting that which revolts against love. And I'm like, is there any should there be any other definitions made? And I'm like, no, because of anybody, he had been through so many injustices at society opposing him, and heinous crimes, and he had the wherewithal to incorporate love into his definition of justice. And I'm like, the man was not only an anointed preacher, but he was called, and for such a time as we were in at that time.
Absolutely. So let's go backwards a little bit. I would think most innocent bystanders or general citizens think criminal justice system, it's the point you're making, like the attention is on the perpetrator. So the wrongdoer there's got to be justice, and justice equals wrongdoer being held accountable. And so you're bringing up a very large idea. Actually, justice includes the wrongdoer, but we don't have any emphasis on the actual victim. And so it's a really big idea, is putting somebody behind bars, does that bring healing to the victim? And you're saying not necessarily. Maybe unpack that a little bit, because it seems like a really, like a no-brainer to me. But again, we're all products of our culture, and we're all influenced by what is normal around us. Yeah. And I think what's normal around us is, hey, there's got to be accountability for wrong done. And I guess we equate accountability to time served. Yeah. But what, in your experience, is there any healing there? Like, is there anything that feels like transformative is what I mean? You would say restorative, I would say like it actually shifts the situation, both victim and wrongdoer. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit more, because again, you're saying it's a way of approaching injustice. It's a philosophy. It's I love the philosophy, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the philosophy. Oh, yeah. I think a lot of people immediately react with like, so what you're saying is if somebody messed up, they don't need to be held to account. I think that's people's initial reaction. Yeah. Which I don't think that's the case, but I want you to speak to that a bit.
That is absolutely not what I'm saying. And I know I've had several conversations with law enforcement officers, about this. And I say it like this. I said, careful how I say it. The garbage you're seeing on the news about, no accountability, where mobs of criminals break into a store to get their reparations and haul all kinds of stuff out, or, and then some district attorney calls that, well, this is restorative justice, they're getting their reparations. And if I was a cussing person, I would cuss at that moment, because that is exactly not what it is. Sorry. That is not at all anything near. That is just more harm, more crime, more wrongdoing, more injustice. How can anyone in their right mind call that restorative or call it just? No one. And so, I told this law enforcement officer actually recently, I said, how bad cops give good cops a bad name? I said, that right there, that example of restorative justice gives restorative justice a bad name, because that is not restorative and it's not just. Restorative justice, when it happens, it restores relationships, not destroy them. It repairs harm that's been done, not create more harm. And so, am I getting louder? Because I feel like I'm getting louder, like I'm yelling in my office. But it's frustrating. And I've even had a conversation with a law enforcement officer recently. He said, can you change the name? Can you just brand it something else so it's not called restorative justice? And I'm like, how about we change people's minds instead? Yeah. How about we just give them the truth about what it really is, so that they can so that the lie can be exposed about what it's not. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I think needs to be done, is that we need to change people's minds. And it's a big task. So what you're talking about, people think it's all about no accountability. Well, that's not true. So it's even a more intense level of accountability, because what happens is that you come face to face with the people that you actually harmed. In a court of law, you don't have to worry about those faces, because they're usually not in there. And when you're in time, you sit and face a wall. What's the wall going to do to you? It's passive. It's passive accountability.
Well, no, that's the thing. I think the system, it kind of, it removes people from people. And so again, the question is, okay, is the system working? And again, I'm definitely not having these conversations to try to throw the system under the bus or vilify law enforcement. That's not my goal. But
No, and I hope
yeah,
that doesn't come off that I'm saying it that way.
no, you're not at all.
I love them and I'm thankful for them. I support
So am
them.
I. So am I, and so do I. But again, I think that the system does create an opportunity for removal of that accountability we seek. So you're talking about, no, you actually have to come face to face with who you harmed. Talk
Yeah.
about that more, and maybe you have a story or two to share where you've seen impact.
Well, sure. I mean, reinserting the human element is a big deal. And
Mm.
really, I think that's something that's not only missing from the criminal legal system, it's missing from a lot of systems, and COVID didn't help. And so, it's like, I said this the other day, and I'm going to say it again, even though it may or may not apply here, but, having faced a pandemic, which is something in our history we've never done in our history, our lifetime, it's like it requires us to do things that we've never done before, or address situations that using tools or resources that we've never used before. And I think, even in a restorative setting, it requires us to do something because it's all about people and relationships. And so now that I've said that, I totally forgot what your question was.
Just if you have any stories that you can recall of,
Oh yeah.
like when a perpetrator had to face a victim, and what you would say, like, wow, that was healing, or that was restorative.
Yeah, and let me give a little, I don't know if this is too much information, but let me give a little bit of the science behind all that. Because we're,
Sure.
We're psychological and biological beings too.
Yep.
And so, we're hardwired for empathy. Human beings are hardwired for empathy. And that can be stimulated when you're having a face-to-face encounter. And one of the ways it does that is with our, we have mirror neurons in our brain somewhere in our back there. Mm-hmm. And the way that those are activated is that I could be looking at someone while they're telling a story, and it could incorporate all the emotions and the feelings and the experience and this process. And as they're telling the story, then what happens as I'm listening is that my mirror neurons are projecting me into that story. Mm-hmm. So that as I hear this person tell the story, it's like, oh, I understand. Ooh, I felt that too. Wow. And so what it does is it stimulates those chemicals that release all of my whatever's associated with, there's all my science terminology, all those things that get stimulated that release my ability to have empathy for the person that's telling me the story. Mm-hmm. And so in a restorative justice process, we're having the person responsible for causing harm, we're having them actually, they start telling the story, like, how did you get to that place that you committed this crime? Like, what was going on through your thoughts, and what happened before that? And so bring us to that point. And then what happened? And so as they're telling this story, the victim is actually listening, like, oh, so that's why. Oh, and it's not that the victim was the wrongdoer and needed to change their mind. But what happens is that, the victim. So the victims are the ones who really need to also understand. They also need to understand why and how this person was capable, because in their own thoughts, this person is a monster. They're only capable of doing something bad and evil. And so it doesn't help them heal. It doesn't help them get past that point. And so when they hear the story, they're actually able to get past the point of that monster's not out to get me. Wow. Oh. And so it starts there. And then when the victims are empowered, and this is why it's a healing process for victims, is because victims are empowered to articulate how they were impacted. Well, when you did this, I was so afraid. I didn't know if I was going to live. I didn't know. I was so scared. Mm. And so when a wrongdoer is confronted with how their behavior impacted someone, they're like, but that's not who I am. And I've had a wrongdoer say that to me. during a process, they were informed how their behavior impacted their victim. And they were shocked. They were like, but that's not me. That's not who I am.
Wow.
I'm like, I know. But, and this is the reality is your behavior, how you portrayed yourself in that setting, whatever brought you to that point, when you did that behavior demonstrated to your victim that you are that kind of person. How can you repair that? And so there's this transitional piece that happens in a restorative justice process, a victim offender dialogue, say. There's this transitional piece that when we come to a place of understanding, like, oh, that's why it happened. They weren't necessarily targeting me, or they weren't necessarily trying to kill me, or, whatever the situation may be. They were just, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, then they're able to take the next step. And the next step is, well, how can I know that this won't happen again? Or what can you do to repair my broken window, my car, my whatever, the crime, whatever that was? How are you going to fix that? And, in the case of someone who maybe lost their life as a result of the behavior, it's like, yeah, I've not sat in on one of those conversations, but I will be within the next year. Is that, how can this be fixed?
Yeah.
Because, there's the loss of life here, and, that those are hard to answer. And I don't, because I've not been in that position, I don't have answers. Sure. But the people who do have answers are the ones responsible for that event. And those are answers that victims need to hear. They've got questions, and getting answers to those questions help with the healing process. Throwing someone in prison for 150 years never brought anyone healing, ever. Now, it might give them some semblance of public safety, maybe, but it won't bring healing, the kind of healing that we are looking for. And I totally get it. Victims don't want to, they're so scared, they're angry. I don't want to talk to that person. I don't want to have nothing to do with them. I never want to see them for the rest of my life. And you know what? I totally get it, because fear does that. Fear communicates that, no, just stay away from me. But they've always got those questions that are burning inside of them that don't get answered. And those create some emotional, unresolved issues for them.
Yeah.
But
and you mentioned this earlier. Talk about, you use the word trauma. So those that may be wrongdoers or perpetuating injustice, their backstory often influences their future story or their present story, choices they're making. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, there's so much science with adverse childhood experiences and how trauma impacts us biologically. It rewires some of our DNA even. Trauma can do that. Let me share a piece of good news about that first, though, is that even though trauma can rewire some things, all that negative, the truth is, and science shows, that positive events or hopeful events can actually start to heal those negative events. So positive events, even just encountering encouraging people, or happy events where you're experiencing genuine joy, then that can also rewire your system and to start repairing some of the harm that trauma has done. But our prison systems are filled with people, they say about between 80 and 90+% of the prison population, excuse me, has experienced high levels of childhood trauma. Okay. And those trauma experiences tend to go unresolved. It also, childhood trauma tends to lead to short-lived lives if it goes unresolved for their life. but also unhealthy lifestyles. It adjusts how we think, what we think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a thought there. Like if the encounter with the criminal justice system, the criminal legal system could be a hopeful event, would that contribute to healing? And that's a big question. Like if you have restorative justice moments where you're facing and actually communicating with those you've wronged and serving time to whatever, mete out some level of accountability, but there's like maybe like a light at the end of the tunnel. There's like, hey, I'm going through a process that is fixing the issue. I guess that's my big question. Does it seem, in your estimation, that the current system includes that which people feel like, yeah, I'm doing a process that is fixing a problem? We talked to one individual that was incarcerated, and he talked about once he moved on from county jail and was in more of like the prison. Is that, I don't have the terms right. You have county jail and then you have like more long-term prison stay. That when he was in the long-term prison, he was like, no, it was actually pretty restorative. Like there were a lot of programs there. I felt like I was like going somewhere with my time, versus he said when I was in county or here locally, he's like, there wasn't really anything besides feeling like you're a rat in a cage. And no, it wasn't helpful at all. It was just pretty destructive. Talk about that, because I know you have programs to help people integrate. You definitely address recidivism rates. Talk about like what the system either is doing well or could look like if it's not doing well, that feels like, wow, there'd be a lot of hope on that. That feels like people would be, they're moving through a process and it's helping, it's not hurting.
Well, like your friend mentioned, just the piece about, repairing harm that has been done, because what we're talking about, 80 to 90% of the prison population have had adverse childhood experiences, and those haven't been addressed. So when we're talking about having programs inside institutions, it's like, that should be a no-brainer. And as a matter of fact, I'm happy to say that I want to say it's 1180. Oh yeah, California legislation was passed several years ago, and they rewrote some of the sentencing law to incorporate restorative justice into their definition of sentencing. Okay. And it used to say, and I'm going to slaughter it, they used to say it was focused on punishment, but now it's for the purpose of something and restorative justice. And so the good piece is that they're getting restorative justice into the institutions. So so that will help those individuals who are incarcerated to address at least their own childhood trauma. And I'll say this too, when I started studying restorative justice in 2013, my very first training was a 40-hour training, and most of that was done inside San Quentin State Prison. Okay. And so these individuals, one of them had done like 37 years and was still incarcerated. And he was, the individuals are required to eventually, they're required to say their victim's name, which is that alone is a hard thing, especially if there's someone who is deceased, because they have to overcome so much shame about what they had actually done. And so but what they get to also do is address their childhood trauma in a restorative way. Okay. So that's just a big piece. And so having restorative justice, at least starting in the state prison system, it's a big deal. It's really a big deal. It should be a volunteer process, restorative justice process, a victim offender dialogue, it's all voluntary. No one should be ever be forced to do it. So,
Yeah. How common is it to have a victim offender dialogue? Is that pretty out of reach, or is that fairly accessible?
It depends, it takes a while. It depends on the culture and the environment. So down in Southern California, well, in Fresno, I think they have a judge who actually supports a restorative process.
Okay.
And so it's part of their university. They have Fresno Pacific actually has a restorative justice program where they train people in dialogue, in how to do a victim offender dialogue. And Vermont, the state of Vermont has it, the state of Virginia, and I think Maryland also. So there's a few states, and Oregon, the state of Oregon. But, there are certain counties that don't support it because they support a more punitive process.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a mindset thing. It sounds like
Exactly.
the idea probably hasn't taken root yet, and
yeah, it's a big ship to turn.
Let's shift gears a little bit. So some of the things that you guys have seen in your work, you mentioned you're doing some preventative work on campuses with youth. I love that. Let's go a little bit further downstream, like with those that are incarcerated and maybe coming out. Do you guys have programs? Or I know we interviewed a guy that worked for you that was running your Nurturing Fathers program, and that was unbelievable, the stories there. So those are guys either about to get in the system or coming out of the system, kind of both ends of the spectrum. And talk about that, because that was epic. Anything else that you could talk about that feels like, this is, we're playing our part and it might be making a dent, it's helping some people?
Yes. So he was great facilitating those, and some of those guys are they're either trying to stay out of the system or they're coming out of the system. So prevention looks like positive engagement, pro-social behaviors, those are the terms. And so positive social engagement is, having someone positive in your life that can help you redirect some of your mindsets if you're, on the border of, getting involved in a more criminal lifestyle, so having someone help you redirect your path. And so those are preventions that look like mentoring. Mentoring is a prevention, where you're engaging with someone who's a healthy influence in your life. We have our Nurturing Fathers program is helping dads be really great dads. And one of the things that they have to address is, their own father wounds. And so they have to at least, now they not only acknowledge I've been wounded by my dad, but coming to terms with it so that you're not angry and that you don't repeat the same offense, because if it hasn't been healed, it's going to hurt. And so, so Nurturing Fathers, helping dads. And then we were doing restorative families, where we're helping families address some of their own ACEs and bringing healing to the families so that they don't pass it on to the next generation, to their kids. Some of the work that we're doing in schools is we take teams of folks who just love youth. And so they do, like you are doing also, I think you're still sending groups onto school campuses and doing group mentoring. So we have group mentoring going on, and we also have classes that we have 4 days a week on some school campuses where we're some of the classes are called habitudes, adjusting our habits and attitudes, developing leaders. And if you're really thinking positively about yourself, it's not likely you're going to do something intentionally to destroy your future. And so we're one of the preventions is promoting individuals to really learn the value of their identity and identity building, celebrating their uniqueness, having circles. Circles really is a great tool for developing community, social skills. We've had youth discover the names of someone in their class. They've been in class for the last, like the same class for 2 years in a row, and they didn't even know each other's name.
Yeah.
And so it's all about the relationship. And then, so those are some of the prevention pieces that we teach in schools. And then we have a RISE project. It's called Respect, Integrity, and Service with Excellence. And the thought, or the theory of change behind that is that people are more likely to invest in their community when they feel like they belong in it. And a lot of times, with our people that have committed crimes, or they've done some wrongdoing, or even kids in juvenile hall, a lot of society just wants to keep them out, ostracize them, just keep them away from us, and we just reject them. And when we reject individuals, they're likely to, keep causing harm. But when people feel like they belong or they have value, they're likely to invest in that community rather than harm it. And so that's one of the projects we do also. And we do a lot of work inside juvenile hall. I can't talk a lot about those situations, but let's just say transformation is happening, helping some youth with a victim offender dialogue. They're working with people that they've actually harmed, and working to repair the harm that they've actually caused, and eventually getting to those face-to-face encounters. So to have a formal victim offender dialogue, it takes a lot of prep work. So you've got to meet with all the parties and have interviews and make sure that they're prepared to get to that place. Asking them questions about, first of all, asking the person responsible for causing harm, like, so how do you think your victims are feeling right now? And how do you think you impacted their life? And I want you to start giving some thought in how you could start repairing, some of the things that you did. And so it's just helpful to have them start getting their thoughts, thinking about the people they've actually harmed and how their behavior impacted them.
Which is like, wow, I mean, that's got to be a shock to their system, especially if they're quote unquote used to the system of just perpetuating problems, to actually stop and like, hey, let's think about the person you hurt. That might be a moment of revelation, huh? Like, what? There's a person on the other end of that action.
Yeah, I give them some homework. So, and it's just a list of about 10 questions that makes them think, like, so how have you been impacted? And what else is, how else have you been impacted? And how was your family impacted? And so then answer all these questions through the lens of your victim. How would your victim answer this question?
Wow.
So yeah, it's been an eye-opener for them.
Yeah. And to be able to, like, that sounds like real accountability.
Yeah.
Again, not that serving time is not an element of accountability, but that's like a different level of accountability. Like, well, I gotta think about the other person. And I think for people that are used to crossing the line, like their normal is I'm the bad kid or I'm the bad person. Maybe it just becomes something you don't ever have to really think about. You just keep doing the wrong thing and screwing up and just who I am. And you don't even think about who you're hurting and how your actions impact another person. And so that sounds like powerful shift, possibly.
Yeah. And that's the shift. The shift is, between the ears. If we can change how people think about, wrongdoing, or even the people who are responsible for causing harm, then I think we've got a good handle on raising more awareness. And I'm just going to give a shameless plug. This is not for me, but this book right here. I don't know if you can. It's not backwards. Good. But Howard Zehr, he's the author of this book. It's called The Little Handbook of Restorative Justice, and it really provides just the foundational pieces about what restorative justice is, and that, it's got a lot of its roots or foundational pieces in traditional or indigenous settings. With South Africa, truth and reconciliation trials were all about restorative justice. New Zealand, the Maori tribes have, family group conferencing as a very restorative justice model. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Howard Zehr, because he really articulated well in that little book of restorative justice about the foundational pieces and the importance of it, and just helping people to understand what it is and what it is not.
Yep, that's beautiful. I was just going to ask if there's any sort of inspiration, education. So how do you pronounce or spell his last name? Howard?
Zehr, Z-E-H-R.
Great. Any other influences? I know you refer to Brian Stevenson a lot.
Love Brian Stevenson. Yeah. Just Mercy. Well, if you're involved in schools, restorative justice in schools, I would recommend anything written by Margaret Thorsborn. She's an Australia whiz with all things restorative justice, and she has a lot of the science behind why restorative justice works. Interestingly, she was a biology teacher, high school teacher, and she just got frustrated with traditional disciplinary systems, and she just started going after restorative justice in schools and realized, oh my gosh, this is why it works, because we are wired for restorative processes.
Yeah. Her last name again, Margaret
Thorsborn, Thorsborne.
Nice. Great resources. Yeah. And how would people follow you, find you guys if they want to find out more about you and your work, Hope City?
So hopecityreading.com, that's our website. I'm Jackie Durant. I'm mostly on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is so helpful. I love the hope that's in this. I love how practical all this is. I appreciate you taking time to be with us, and I think we're going to say goodbye with that. So those that are taking time with us here, you got some good resources, a little book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zehr, Brian Stevenson, who is basically the film Just Mercy was featured on his life. His organization is the Equal Justice Initiative. Margaret Thorsborn is another author. That's the first time I've heard that name, so that's something to look into. And then hopecityreading.com, so you can get in touch with Jackie, see some of their initiatives here locally. Thanks for your time, Jackie. Appreciate what you guys are doing.
Lance, really appreciate you.
All right, we'll talk soon.
All right, so long.
See ya.